Greetings, everyone. Rob Chassner here, continuing in our introduction to each of the books of the Bible. And this video is going to cover an introduction to the Gospel of Luke. Some interesting things about the writer of this Gospel. Luke is an unusual guy for many reasons. First, he's the only non-Jewish author of the Bible. Another interesting thing is that Luke was obviously a highly intelligent man, because there are over 750 words which Luke uses that are not found anywhere else in the New Testament. And so obviously Luke was a guy with a very broad vocabulary. Luke actually ends up writing more than any other writer in the New Testament. Now, we typically think that the Apostle Paul wrote the most in the New Testament because Paul wrote 13 letters. But when you take into the account that Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, which is the longest of the four Gospels, he also wrote the book of Acts. By sheer volume alone, he is hands down the only, the one who wrote the most in the New Testament. Luke is also writing in the female perspective, in the sense that it's a female-sensitive gospel. Luke mentions 13 women who are not found anywhere else in the other three Gospels. Also, he gives a real prominence to prayer. We have recorded Jesus saying 15 prayers in the New Testament, and of those 15, you're going to find 11 of those 15 prayers in the Gospel of Luke. Luke is called by the Apostle Paul the beloved physician. He was by profession a medical doctor. And when you read this gospel and you look at the vocabulary which he uses, you will find a lot of medical terminology. For example, when Peter's mother-in-law is said to have a fever, the other gospels just say that she had a fever. The Gospel of Luke, he terms it more specific as a high fever. And the term which he uses has the meaning that it has grown to something that is now life-threatening. And so it wasn't just a fever, but rather a life-threatening fever. When the man comes who has leprosy, and the other gospel writers just say that he has leprosy, in Luke's gospel, the word he uses has the meaning of full of leprosy, or full-blown leprosy, or stage 4, or advanced leprosy. The leprosy has run its course, and now it's bringing this man unto death. When Jesus said that it would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, Luke uses the term surgical needle, where Matthew and Mark just use the term of a clothing needle. And so we are able to see that Luke interprets things through the lens of medicine. You can also note that it's interesting that when it came to the woman who had the issue with blood, she had been hemorrhaging for 12 years, and the other gospel writer said that she had spent all of her money paying physicians, and yet none of those treatments worked. Well, Luke, he completely leaves this incident out, perhaps in a way to preserve the reputation of his fellow physicians. When we think of doctors in the first century, you should not think of these guys as a notch above a witch doctor, but rather these were very bright guys, highly intelligent. They were making tremendous advances in medicine. In fact, this is the only time in human history where a man's life expectancy was actually greater than a woman's. And the reason for that is that Rome had bludgeoned the world into submission, and you do not keep order in the world through your military unless you have a vast advancement in medicine for your military. Today, the idea of hospitals actually came from the Roman military. And here is what one first-century physician had to say. This is a quote: "Care should be taken when there are swamps in the neighborhood, because certain tiny creatures which cannot be seen by the human eye breed there. They float through the air and enter the body by the mouth and the nose, and they cause serious disease." End of quote. Now, isn't that interesting? They didn't have microscopes back then, but they were intelligent enough to know that there was something going on in the unseen world. They didn't understand bacteria or viruses or germs, but they knew that there was something there, and they knew that there was some degree of caution needed to be taken, or else the disease could advance. So Luke is a doctor. Luke becomes a constant travel companion to the Apostle Paul. We know that the Apostle Paul was incarcerated. He was arrested in Jerusalem under false charges. He gets jerked around by the criminal system for a couple of years. It appears that what happened is that Luke took advantage of this period of time. His boss is in jail, likely thinking, so what shall I do? So he begins to travel throughout Galilee and Judea, and he begins to put together an investigation of the gospel. And we need to understand that Luke was like an investigative reporter, and he is examining the facts. He's talking to eyewitnesses. He begins to put together a very clear ledger by speaking with eyewitnesses, and one of those eyewitnesses is none other than Jesus' mother, Mary, because it is Luke who not only tells us what Mary said and what Mary did, but also he tells us what Mary was feeling at the time of those events. Now, how else would Luke know what Mary was feeling unless he actually spoke with her? And you can visualize Luke sitting there with an aging Mary, and she would say, and then the angel told me this, and then Luke, being a doctor, likely he would ask, well, how did that make you feel? What did that feel like when that happened? And so he begins to investigate to get Mary's perspective of those events. So why does this non-Jewish investigator investigate the events of Jesus Christ? Well, as we get into our study in the next video, as we begin in verse 1 through verse 25, we're going to be told why he investigates the events of Jesus Christ. All right, I hope this has been helpful and informative as an introduction to the Gospel of Luke. Thank you for viewing, and good day.